In all these examples, it's listening to, understanding, and bringing the client or an audience able to relate to their needs and solve a problem.
You're listening to the Traffic Handler Podcast. We're about getting new customers, making more sales, and growing your e-commerce retail business. I'm your host, Amy Biddle. My guest today is Scott Edwards. Scott has a storied past, and you'll hear some of those stories in just a moment. One of Scott's claims to fame is his podcast, which carries the tagline, celebrating 40 plus years on the fringe of show business. The tagline refers to a business he owned, Laughs Unlimited, which was just the 12th full-time comedy club in the United States. And that was back in 1980. I asked Scott to join me today so we could talk about messaging and marketing. You'll see why. This guy gave a master's class in rapport building. You'll want to hear this show more than once. Sharpen your pencil. Get ready to learn about marketing, messaging through the vehicle of comedy. So with me tonight is Scott Edwards, and he's a funny guy. I had so much fun, Scott, looking at your website, listening to your podcast, kind of stalking you before our meeting today. And Scott, I'll let you talk about yourself. You ran a comedy club, not just any comedy club, but the 12th one in the country, and met a lot of really interesting people and did a lot of things. And we're going to talk about comedy and marketing and messaging, which that's quite a mix. So,
well, I got to tell you, I'm just so thrilled to be here with the queen of marketing. Amy, you have a terrific podcast and it shares so much valuable information for your listeners. Just to be here is an honor, but it is true that back in 1980, yes, 1980, long before many of our listeners were around, I started the 12th comedy club in the country. At that time, it happened to be my third company I had started, but it was the one that I definitely had the most fun with. For the older people listening, my opening act making $100 a week was Gary Shandling. One of my first headliners and a very good friend was Bob Saget, who we sadly recently lost. But those two guys, Dave Coulier from Full House, George Wallace out of Las Vegas, these were the guys that helped give me the foundation of what turned out to be a very successful comedy club chain. I had 3 clubs. I ran them for about 21 years. And then I sold, but my original club, Laughs Unlimited, is still operating. So it was one of the first clubs in the country. And now 41 years later, it's one of the oldest standing all comedy showrooms in the country. And I take a little pride in that.
I think you should. I think you should be very proud of that. I think it's phenomenal. And, like our listeners are mostly e-commerce, people. So
wait, I'll talk slower then.
No, right, exactly. So I do want to make the connection clear. Scott's talking about running a business and running a very successful business for 21 years and the expansion and the business exit. So, listen to people. He's going to say some really smart things, no pressure to, help us make that connection. But,
I was just going to say, I don't know if it's that smart stuff. To be honest, Amy, I've actually opened and operated over a dozen companies over my lifetime. Everything from the comedy club chain and a chain of restaurants to a small construction company. And I recently just sold and retired as a longtime insurance agent broker.
Wow.
And so a breadth of ideas that I turned into companies. But one thing that always stands strong is marketing. Yeah. You have to be able to reach your clientele, speak to your clientele's needs, answer their problems. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, whatever your business is. But what we wanted to talk about today is, even though I ran a chain of comedy clubs for 21 years and had a chance to work with Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno and Dana Carvey, people like that, Paula Poundstone, what really made me a success in all of my businesses is using comedy or humor in my marketing and advertising, because it's been proven that comedy or doing something funny really grabs the attention of the public. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And, in casual, like I don't do it on the podcast, but like in casual conversation, I'm supposed to be the funny one, in my group of people. And, making people laugh makes me really happy, but it's disarming. And, it really opens doors. And so
Oh,
I,
yeah,
that's huge for me.
you hit the nail on the head right there, Amy, because all of my businesses were based on customer service skills or salesmanship. So whether I was selling my small construction company or comedy tickets to my clubs or selling my food at my restaurants or selling insurance to somebody, I was actually a fleet director in the auto industry for a while. It's all about sales and customer service, but that means communicating with people. And when you communicate with people and you're humorous, or you have at least a personality and sense of humor, you're able to connect with them on an emotional level, because emotion, comedy and laughing is an emotion. And so that connection can really help you close the deal, as they say.
Right. Exactly. Whatever kind of deal, whether you're selling, home decor or apparel or food or insurance, it's mano a mano. I mean,
Oh yeah, you talked about insurance. A great example. I was going to bring it up later on, but the TV commercials that Allstate does using mayhem.
yeah.
So that it's all physical comedy. This guy's just doing wacky stuff and hurting himself, but it's all to sell insurance.
Right.
And people remember those commercials. They remember the mayhem character
Yeah.
because it's funny. He doesn't ever really get hurt, but he does some amazing things. But going back to my first point, in all of my companies, I was kind of old school. So a lot of people think, oh, you got to have tens of thousands of dollars and you have to spend a small fortune to reach people. And to be honest, of course, today it's different because we have social media. So you can actually reach tens of thousands of people with really no money. But back in the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, before the internet, yes, there was a time before the internet, you had to use print. There were a thing called newspapers. They were on paper and people read them. There was TV commercials. Radio was actually still substantial in people's lives.
Wow.
And so I used to utilize humor and comedy in my TV, radio, and print ads, because that always made the ads more attentive. People noticed them more. And something else about comedy, it tends to make the product more memorable.
Mm-hmm.
And so back in those days, I mean, I spent my share of money. There was one time I did a huge billboard and spent $10,000 for a month having a full-size billboard. But then I was smart and I connected with a radio station, put their logo on my billboard, and guess what? They gave me $10,000 in trade on airtime.
Right.
So I spent 10, but I got 20,000 in marketing by being creative and doing something simple like that.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways to reach your clientele, no matter what your product, no matter what your message, but comedy does enhance that connection.
Always. It's, when you can connect with somebody at a heart level and, build that rapport to actually get a smile or make them laugh, or, there's a connection there. And we like people who make us laugh. We just like them. Until you read them out of them in the newspaper and they've done some heinous thing, but
Yeah, and it seems kind of like common sense, but to be honest, there's years of research behind this and millions of dollars spent. Let's take, for example, Super Bowl ads.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a big thing every Super Bowl, which is the funniest ad. And you see Budweiser and Doritos spending millions of dollars to get a 30-second or 1-minute ad at the Super Bowl. They're not going to waste it, talking about the ingredients in the beer or the crispness of the Doritos chip. No, they're going to do something slapsticky or funny, something memorable, because those humorous ads, it enhances attention, it allows name recognition, and it adds that memorability so that people can go out and buy the product that they just saw.
Yeah. Yep. And, we're always selling status. We're not selling chips. We're not selling, whatever the thing is. We're selling the feeling that goes with getting that.
And it's so true, but even on a more personal level. So we're talking about national products that have used humor to make their sales stronger and spread the product recognizable, more awareness of a product. But even on the street level, a salesman like me selling insurance or selling a construction job or selling a car, it is that connectability with the customer, and it's usually through humor, good personality, being a positive person. You don't want to be selling insurance by walking in and go, well, someday your place will burn down and you'll be destitute. You want to buy my insurance? It's not going to work, right? No. You want to take all that fear away from them. You want to take that concern away and say, hey, you have problems, I'm going to solve them. You have worries, I'm going to take them away. We're here to help you. That's what my job is.
That's it.
And that kind of energy and positive attitude is catching the customer. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of practice that goes into that. Now we're getting into sales skills, which is a huge part of selling anything. You've got to have rapport. About 1,000 years ago, I worked for a combined life insurance, which was, of course, W. Clement Stone. Yes.
No way. My very first insurance job was with Combined Insurance. Yeah. These guys, for the listening audience, Amy, I'm going to jump in here.
Good.
Because you're the first person I've ran into that has the same story as me. So this company, Combined Insurance, takes all these young, impressionable salespeople. They send them to Chicago where they brainwash them for 3 weeks. And you come out, and when a sign says no entry, that means only you can come in.
I did that.
Yeah, if you don't, no salespeople. Oh, except me.
Except me. That's right. I'm special.
Brainwashed us.
Mr. Stone sent me.
Right. And the book by Emmett Stone and all that great stuff. I mean, it did teach me a lot. But at the time, I was like 18 selling life insurance, and it was wild because because you went through it. You're selling $2,500 and $5,000 policies, and the big policy was 10 grand. Ooh.
Yeah.
And it was a policy that paid if you fell out of a plane on a Tuesday and landed in a certain kind of palm tree.
That's about it. Yeah. But you know what? The people, I love the people who got those policies. And I think that's where my love of sales comes from. Before that, I had been selling real estate. So I've done a bunch of
rainbow vacuums. How about that?
Oh, nice job. Yes. I never went door to door. Because you remember with Combined with Life, you made your appointments. The accident people gave you the lead, and then you could make your appointments and go from there. So it wasn't exactly door to door, but it was the next best thing.
Where were you working, Amy?
Upstate New York.
See, for me in California, we did the Chicago brainwashing, and then they let us loose, but we didn't get leads. It was door to door, but business door to door.
Okay.
And so I can relate to the customers that I sold to. In fact, I remember getting notified when the first one of my clients passed away and the company paid off on the policy, because it was a big deal. Most people, sadly, the way this company Combined made a lot of money was that most people didn't keep it up. They'd pay their premium for 5 years and then let it go. And then when they died, they didn't have to pay out. Sorry, that's a secret to the insurance industry. But I was taught door-to-door sales on a small business commercial level from Combined Insurance. And when I went into construction, when I was selling fleet vehicles to construction companies, when I was selling insurance on a commercial level, everything I learned was the foundation was Combined Insurance. Yeah. So I make fun of it now and pick on it a little bit, but what a great way to learn as a teenager.
Yes, absolutely. And just the training was priceless. Like, how to develop rapport with somebody who you just met. I mean, key. Killer.
Some of the basics, eye contact. I'm sure you remember the mirror method, where if the customer is sitting back, then you sit back. If they lean forward, you lean forward.
Yeah.
It's all about connecting with the person. And again, we've kind of gone off track a little bit. We're talking about salesmanship, but it really connects to marketing, because even though as a salesman face to face, you want to connect with your potential client, your prospect. In marketing, the whole community is your prospect. How are you going to connect with them?
Right.
And that's where I can't do eye contact. I can't use the mirror method. I can't do those things. So we use comedy or humor to capture their attention and hopefully get them aware of your brand and your product.
Absolutely. Yes. And, so in the part of my business that's technical, where we're doing Facebook ads, and we've got all the metrics that tell us, it's kind of like a rating, almost like a Nielsen rating. Like, people love your ad, they're clicking on it. People hate your ad, they're not clicking on it. And you get numbers back about that. So, when you've hit the note, you're getting like a 1% click through or a 5% click through, and yes, people are resonating with what I'm saying. It's just, there's always feedback, like when I'm talking with somebody, I can tell mostly, maybe I'm pretending, oh, they like me, or I can pretend that they like me,
Well, so, you make a good point, is that the analytics of any marketing plan are important to follow, because as a young entrepreneur, you only learn by making mistakes. I mean, one of the key things that we learned at Combined is failures are the stepping stones to success. You're going to get 9 no's to get that 1 yes.
That's right.
And you have to, in the case of marketing, use the analytics to guide you and kind of set the goalposts so that you have a target that you want to take your message to.
Right.
That is going to resonate with the largest group of audience, and all those skills. It's so funny because we've both read the books. You can take courses, you can do the lessons, but I'm a seat of the pants guy. I learned by doing it. I was those many failures. I had several companies I own, and I've been a millionaire a couple times. I've been flat broke and bankrupt a couple times. I mean, it's just part of the process. You learn each and every day, hopefully, if you're smart.
Yeah, it's something every day. And I make a mistake, and then I just decide I'm going to make a different mistake next time, and not the same one. Seems to go better that way.
Yeah, and what's exciting is at some point you don't make that mistake and you close a huge sale, or you help somebody with a huge problem, and that's when you get. I think that's why people like you and I, Amy, are in this industry, is that we have an appreciation for what we've accomplished, right? We, in insurance, it was solving someone's problem or being there when they're having the lowest time in their life, is when we're there to bring them up and lift them up. In comedy, I've seen all the shows thousands of times. I watch the audience, and seeing them, they're not thinking about their bills. They're not thinking about going to work the next day. For the time they were in my comedy club, they're having nothing but fun. And what's interesting is I had a 200-seat room. As the owner, as the producer, I could find the 1 or 2 people that weren't laughing, and I would watch them until they broke, right? Oh. That was like the little challenge, right? I know that this next bit's going to do it, and you're waiting for it, because then you feel like, oh, great, I got them all, right?
Yes.
You made a difference in everyone's day.
That's good. So I want to make this a little bit trickier, because there are people listening and they're like, okay, yeah. Sales training, messaging, you're telling me what to do, but how are people who are listening, how can they learn better? I mean, I've got ideas about this, but I'm really interested in yours. How can they learn better to actually sell? This is not just, here's this thing, buy this thing, because one of my big pet peeves is the shop now button.
Oh,
What if we didn't have any buttons at all?
right.
How can people use personality and humor and comedy or, rapport? We're talking about rapport. How can they, not just to do it, but how to do it? How can somebody get started?
Well, I don't know if this will answer your question, but I think it's a good analogy. My father was a lifelong traveling salesman.
Mhm.
He started off in the tobacco industry. He ended up in the trophy industry. He actually was one of the people that created the Emmy Award, and he also sold the Oscar to the Oscars people. And he was in the trophy industry for many years. And he was not an extraordinary man on certain levels, but when it came to salesmanship and marketing, what made him so successful, and he was a very successful guy, never made millions, but he got the job done, is that as a traveling salesman, he went business to business. Early on, it was drugstores and tobacco shops, and later on, it was trophy shops. But what was great about my dad was he didn't go in saying, "Hey, buy my product." He went in and sold himself by being personable, by connecting with the customer. What are your issues? What problems are you having? He always had a quick joke or a story to tell.
Yeah.
And his personality was what the customer bought. And then after, a 10 or 15-minute conversation about anything but trophies, he go, "Oh, by the way, how many of these do you need?"
Right.
you know,
Yes.
and he
Yes.
ended up getting great sales. It had nothing to do with the product. It all had to do with being a good communicator. And Amy, you may or may not agree, but I think it's more important to be a good listener.
It is.
A great example of that, ladies and gentlemen, is that for a while I was a car salesman, and I, made President's Club and top sales month after month, and people always wondered what my secret was. Well, it wasn't really a secret. I just asked a question like, "What are you looking for?" And then I'd shut up and listen, and the people will tell you what they want. And it was so funny because there were times when, some guy with his wife and three little kids, "I want a Mustang sports car." And I go, "Well, what are you going to use the car for?" "Well, we got to take the kids to school and we got to go grocery shopping."
Yeah.
I go, "You know what? I know you think you want a Mustang, but let me show you a family van."
Mhm.
"Oh, I don't want a, soccer mom van." I go, "Well, they're different." And you would overcome his objections. But the point of my story is by listening to his needs and remembering them. So when I take him to the van, he goes, I could say, "Well, you mentioned that you needed to get the kids to school and that you sometimes take the neighbor kids. You can't do that in a Mustang, but you know what? This van holds, six people comfortably and safely, has a higher safety rating and get better fuel economy, and well, you said you needed to take the soccer, you needed to take the equipment to the ballpark. You need a trunk space or you need space for that. This van does it, and so I wasn't selling them a van. I was solving their problems by listening and then responding.
Yep. Yep. And I love what you just said. And going back to the story about your dad and the same thing that you just said, because you're telling me you're selling the same way. The product is the rapport. The product is you are engaging with the person that you're standing in front of, and you're listening to their needs, connecting with them. That's the real product. And oh, by the way, you get a van. Oh, by the way, here's a case of trophies.
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah. And to be honest, and just to finish that story, the guy sent me a really nice thank you letter a couple weeks later because his wife really didn't want a Mustang sports car. She really needed something to move the kids around and stuff. And I did solve all their problems with that particular sale. But it's not just one time. You have to be able to do it over and over and over. We got away from comedy a little bit because I was talking about personality in salesmanship,
yes.
but using comedy, Amy, I'm sure you would agree with this. one of the great things about especially physical comedy is it's international. So my podcast is, it's an American podcast with American comics speaking English, but it's traveling all over the world. Podcasts are international. And what I realized in doing my research is that comedy, especially physical comedy or exaggerated comedy in audio, is international. People get it even if they don't speak the language.
Mhm.
And that's something that advertisers figured out a long time ago. If I do a funny ad that works well in America, I could probably run it in England and Australia, in Japan, and it's going to get a similar reaction and increase my sales internationally.
That's perfect. That's really great, because there are so many people who listen to this show who they could go international, and there are ways of doing that. So, you're dealing with human beings, and everybody
Right.
likes to laugh.
Exactly. It's one of those shared experiences that's so emotional and so positive. There's research that laughing has helped cure cancer and other diseases. And it's because when you're laughing, you create endorphins in your body that ignite your brain and your cells and make you feel better and actually have a healing effect. And as I was just relating to, and you agreed, it's international because we're all human beings,
Mhm.
and human beings react emotionally and they laugh and they get those endorphins going and they feel better. And that's when they buy.
Yes, absolutely. Buy now.
Yeah, without a button, though, right?
No button, no, because it has to be the relationship. Now we can't, there are ways of doing that at scale. I mean, obviously the person in the comedy club, they've got lights in their eyes. They can't see everybody in the club, right? They can only see the first couple of rows. So that's one way of saying, yes, you can have a message that conveys to people all the way to the back row, or all the way to all the people that you're talking to on Facebook or your website.
Yeah, it's so true, Amy. That's a good point. That I was mentioning how physical comedy can be international because you don't have to necessarily understand the language, but it is true in our communities, and it is on stage in a comedy club, that the physical comedy might make something easier to sell or punch it up a little bit, but still it's the verbiage, it's the connection, the timing. Oh, timing is so important. Two guys going to a bar and they do, that's not going to fly. Two guys going to a bar, pause.
Because you just wait.
Right. And so what you say, the audio is really and probably more important than the physical, but they do work together. But yeah, it's what you say, whether you're a salesman or whether you're a stand-up comic, it's connecting with the audience and the words you use to create that emotional bond that leads to laughter that is so crucial.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And when I write ads for clients, sometimes I will think of the cadence of a famous line and write the ad to that cadence, because it engenders a feeling.
Oh, that's interesting, Amy. I've actually heard people that have written something, but when they say it, they try to use almost a song beat.
Yes.
Right, like a famous song. I'm no good at this, so I can't even do a sample. But they'll like, there's a popular song, what's that happy song? But they'll pick a song that everybody knows that's like a what do they call it?
Earwig.
Earwig. Yeah, it's in their heads, and then they'll talk in that pattern, right? In that form, and it makes it that much more of a connection and memorable. But you said it first. You're the smart one.
No. I'm just playing off of you. I'm just playing off of the ideas that you're throwing out there. This is fantastic. So let's say someone, because I know that comics deal with this all the time. It's the comedians that frequently will get us through dark times. And we've seen that, my entire life. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. And so, all the, anything that was dark, comedians would make it better. And I grew up watching
Yeah,
TV shows.
both of us have experienced a lot of ups and downs in this country, and I think that that's just what they call life, a four-letter word. There's a lot of other four-letter words that might compete with that, golf being one of them for me. But but it is a real gift that comedy can help us through the challenges of the negative things in our lives. Somebody's, I don't want to give any downer kind of examples, but there are things that have happened that you just have to give it enough time. If you make fun of it too soon, or you try to make light of something too soon, you're insulting people. But if you give it a little bit of time, and then you bring it up in a humorous way, it helps people through that difficult moment. But then there's some things, for example, in my 40 plus years in comedy, there was never a way to make the JFK assassination funny.
No.
There's certain moments in our lives. 9/11's another one. There's these big moments that were heartbreaking, that no matter how many decades go by, you're not going to be able to make fun of and make a joke of. And yet there's other things that seem serious at the moment, but with the passage of time, we found that there's a way to overcome it, right? To get past that negativity, to get past that bad emotion. And comics, as you mentioned, are, because of their gift of creative writing and sharing their thoughts on things, can really help an audience or help a person get over those kind of negative feelings.
Yeah, I that's a real gift, I think, when people can help, a body of people get past something. And you're right, some things are off limits and some things need to stay off limits. But so people who, let's bring it back a little closer to the listeners of this show. They're running a store. We're heading into inflation, recession, who knows what to call it. Every headline I read calls it something else. And they use different measures. So, whatever you want to call it, the economy is in a downtick of some variety. People still want to sell. They still want to make a living. They still want to run their businesses and do everything. So, I think a very key thing you just said was you have to have your finger on the pulse. You have to know what you can say and what you can't say. So in the marketing messages of people who are listening, maybe we're not talking about the economy, but we have to consider all the different ways that people are looking at our materials, right?
Exactly. And what's important to remember is that comedy, much like sales, is trial and error and experience. So a guy writes a joke and goes out on stage and it bombs. He doesn't necessarily give up on it. He adjusts the words, or he changes the timing, and he does it over and over until it takes that lump of coal and provides a gem of a joke. But it could take days, it could take years. Yeah. It's the same in sales, where in marketing, you're talking about using analytics to follow and track and what's going to make something good. You keep working on it until you get it just right. In sales, it's the same thing. You're going into every business with kind of the same speech, the kind of the same sales talk, but you realize with experience, it takes time, what really is going to work. Because for me, using my personality and sense of humor, my connection with customers, I get sales. But there's a guy next to me that doesn't have my personality and he still gets sales. Well, he just found a different way to connect with the client.
Yes.
Maybe he does use the fear factor. I mean, the government loves the fear factor, right? In fact, if you were looking for someone to comment on our society and where we're going financially. You have political comics like Will Durst or Bill Maher, and they're getting on stage and, what's with these clowns in DC? The circus, the monkeys have taken over the circus, and what's going on? And they'll take this high inflation and high gas prices, and they'll make it funny by putting it on the people that caused it.
Yeah.
But he's not attacking the audience.
Right.
He's sharing with them that anger.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we all mad together?
Right.
Well, and this is why we're mad, because these buffoons, don't know what they're doing, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. And they're, again, connecting with the audience on a negative subject.
Mm-hmm.
But they're finding a foil for that, the person who's responsible. And by mocking them, they're getting the audience to join their, anti-government, rant.
Right.
That comes out funny.
Yes.
And again, why does that work over a joke about, flying in an airplane or driving in a car? They're all relatable,
mm-hmm.
right? Everybody in the audience can relate to the price of gases and inflation and the price of homes. And so when a comic takes that topic and takes it to the extreme and finds, kind of picks on the person or organization that's responsible, that's where you get the humor. Yep. It's kind of similar. You don't do it quite as stodgedly, but when you're doing a corporate fundraiser and you're a comic entertainer and you're entertaining the troops, generally you'll pick on the boss, or you'll say something funny about, the main secretary or somebody, because why? Everybody in the audience can relate to that topic. Yeah. Where if you did that same conversation about Bob is the boss over here, but he's doing it over at company B, mm-hmm. no one's going to relate or get it.
Nope. And you can't make fun of the people down the chain either. You have to make fun of up the chain.
Yeah. You don't want to make fun of the minions, because they're the ones that you want to entertain, that need to be lifted up. Again, we're going from sales and comedy, where you want to take the downtrodden, or the people that are upset, or the people that are worried about their lives, and using comedy or your personality, you want to lift them up. In insurance, we want to solve their problems and take away their worries. We want to offer them protection. Whatever the product. In construction, they need this, and you provide a way to get that done in a way so they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Right. So in all these examples, it's listening to, understanding, and bringing the client or an audience able to relate to their needs and solve a problem.
I love that. That was the mic drop moment right there. That was it. I'm always
the crowd goes crazy.
That was it. Fantastic. Great.
Well, it's an interesting topic. And I was so excited when you mentioned combined insurance, because now I know where you get your gift of talking about marketing, is that it's bred in you. You've developed it over time with experience. Your wisdom is what you're sharing on your podcast. And the fact that you mentioned combined insurance, I don't know how old you were. I was 18, 19, and I was a really good salesman, but I didn't get it. When you're, 18 years old, 19 years old, you're not thinking about death. So I was selling a product through, strictly sales things. I wasn't relating, was the point.
No.
And we had that book. Okay.
We had the book. Here, look at the book. And you couldn't even look at the people. You had to look at the book.
That was so, remember that big old thing that was, yes. I don't know, it was like 24 inches. You didn't open it up. And for people in the audience, you actually brought the policy in. And if they signed on the bottom line, you folded it up and handed it to them as they gave you a check. Yeah, that was it. There was nothing from the carrier, nothing, down the road. You were selling the policy on the spot.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
We would read. I learned that a lot of the guys in the region who were the top dogs, they would read the policies every week, like just to know them. And so, talk about really having product knowledge. You really have to have product knowledge. So, all right, we're getting we're getting back into combine. It's like a reunion. So, you know, is there, how can people, I know that you have courses and you help people with comedy. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that now? What are the things you're offering on your website?
Oh, well, thanks for asking, Amy.
Hey, got to make an
Yes,
offer.
I have a website called scottscomedystuff.com, a very fancy name, scottscomedystuff.com. And on there, you will find that I've written 2 books on comedy. One's called Be a Stand-Up Comic, or Hey, Just Look Like One. And the other one I just published in December called 20 Questions Answered About Being a Stand-Up Comic. And both these books were meant to take young creative minds and teach them the basics to go from amateur to pro. You know, I'm not going to be able to teach somebody how to be funny. You got to earn that. You have to want that. You have to kind of have that in you. It's like, you know, you could teach somebody how to play guitar, but they're only a musician if they really work at it and want it. Yeah. So in comedy, I'm not trying to make somebody funny. I'm trying to say, okay, you think you're funny. Here's what you have to do to go pro. This is what you want to do to take it to the next level. And so my book, which is available on Amazon, 20 Questions Answered About Being a Stand-Up Comic, is the basics about not only how to interact with an audience, but the business side of show business. I mean, it's show business. You have to understand the sales side. You have to understand contracts and those kind of things in a light form. I mean, it's entertaining and I have nice drawings and stuff, but it's meant to share some of the knowledge I picked up over 40 years. And then there is an online course on my website. It's based on my first book, Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One, where we literally go through all the stages from open mic to TV celebrity. I have famous people that have made comments in the book, and they talk about the path that it took them from open mic to getting a TV series. And all those are addressed in that online course. So there's a couple different ways to educate people about what I think is a tremendous art form. And Amy, I know that a lot of people go, you know, stand-up comedy, it's dirty, raunchy, you know, in your face, insulting stuff. That's not comedy to me. I'm old school. It comes from the 80s and the 90s where you had to be a good monologist and you had to connect with the audience, and you never dropped an F-bomb because you know what? You can be really funny without it if you're funny.
That's right.
The people that are leaning on F-bombs and being crass are really not funny. You know, they're good shock humor maybe, and you may react with a nervous laughter, but you're not doing the guffaws that you might have gotten from a Larry Miller or Yakov Smirnoff or Paula Poundstone, Elaine Boozler, Ellen DeGeneres worked for me, Robin Williams worked for me. I mean, these are people that had a gift and shared that gift with the audience. And my books and my online course are trying to just help people find that that little bit of creative inside them and what to do with it if they want to. You know, you have to still have the drive. Like any business person, there has to be a drive and an appreciation for what you're doing. But I'm going to go one more step, if you don't mind, Amy.
Please keep going.
You related to it. I do have a podcast. It's called Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. And that's because I was introduced every night for 21 years. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards. And on my podcast, I switch off between actual material from the famous and not so famous comics of the 80s and 90s. But since then, in the last 2.5 years, I've interviewed over 60 professional comics, club owners, managers, agents. And if you listen to those interviews, and they're all about an hour long, they're not only entertaining, but there's, just like this conversation, there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of experience that can be picked up by anybody interested in the art form, right? Mm-hmm. If you have any interest in stand-up comedy and you listen to one of my interviews, and I'm talking to Willie Tyler and the ventriloquist and his pal Lester, or Will Schreiner, who had his own TV show, Bob Fisher, who ran the Ice House, one of the oldest clubs in the country. There's a lot of great information that's presented in a humorous way and in an interesting way. But as you talked about, what you do on your podcast day after day, week after week, is sharing knowledge, but through story form.
Yeah. It has to be story. People can relate to stories, just like humor is part of storytelling. You might cry at the beginning, and by the end, you're holding your side. I mean, that's the outcome you want.
Well, after I closed a sale, they always cried. But how did you get that money out of me?
That's right.
No,
I swore I wasn't going to give you any money, and here we are.
Well, sales and marketing is something that Amy, people like you and I could talk about for hours and hours, because and we've already said this, whether you're a comic selling to an audience, whether you're a restaurateur selling your food to the public, or you're a salesman with a product that you're getting out there either to residential or commercial clients, it is all about marketing, connecting, and being able to share an emotional experience. And they're not always funny, but there's always something that has to be shared, because that's the basics of communication.
Yes.
And communication is the key to, I think, everything business.
I think that was the draw. Like when I reached out to you to come onto the show, that was the draw, because I understand humor is not easy, and you're not going to be funny if you're not connecting with people. It's just not going to happen. So, when I was in college, I was a writer. So I took a painting course to become a better writer. I think if someone studies comedy, and they study the messaging of comedy, and they study the timing and just all the nuances of comedy, they'll be better communicators. And at the end of the day, sales, advertising, and marketing are about communication.
Right. And those people are going to be a success, because they're going to be able to take those tools and create a marketing advertising machine that'll be unstoppable. And that's where success comes from, is having a passion for who you are and your product, but also using the analytics and using your personality and the communication skills to get that to the potential customer or prospect. And it's just a real gift that there's people like you, Amy, out there sharing that message.
You say really nice things, Scott. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's true that the reason I got into podcasting, quick side story for your listeners. I spent 40 plus years on the fringe of show business, I say, and I was getting near retirement, and I spent 2 years and I wrote a book about all my great stories and experiences of being chased around the club with a spoon of cocaine to having to kick out 20 drunk guys. I have some great stories. And my wife said, "You know what, honey, that's really nice. No one's going to read your stupid book. You ought to do a podcast." I'm like, "What's a podcast?" Right? This was about 2.5, 3 years ago. And I'm so glad that she did that, because I would have published my book, put it out there, and it would have sat on some shelf or been on Amazon and picked up a sale here or there, maybe. And the podcasting has not only allowed me to reach a much bigger audience and share my stories and share some of the comedy from really gifted creative guys, but I get to reconnect. I'm actually doing interviews with all these guys that used to work for me, and some that didn't, but I'm still connecting, and I'm still learning stuff, and we share stories, and it's just so entertaining and so much fun that even if nobody listened, I personally have had so much growth and happiness from it that I thank my wife each and every day, because a book, I just wrote one, is a nice thing. It's a great way to share some information. But what you're doing, Amy, and what I try to do with my podcast is we're sharing through communication a way for people to not only be entertained, but even learn something.
And at the end of the day, if you learned something and it didn't hurt too much, that's a win.
Well, hopefully it's not too painful, but everybody, ladies and gentlemen, keep listening to Amy's podcast because she is the queen of marketing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It takes a bow.
That's enough of that. All right, good.
God, thank you so much. Do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Obviously I'm here to talk with you about marketing, but I'm also here to promote my podcast, Standup Comedy, host and MC. Please, if you get a chance, check it out, share it with family and friends. If you are interested in comedy, the website scottscomedyclubs.com. Let me say that again, scottscomedystuff.com. Edit. And there's information out there, but it's also so nice to be able to connect with you, somebody that has a shared life experience and is able to communicate and share these stories in this moment that we just had to the benefit of not only your listeners, but to me. So thank you for that. Thank you, Scott. This has been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed having you here today. Oh, well, we're old combined insurance pals. Come on. You can't miss. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks so much, Amy. Amazing work you're doing. Keep it up. Same to you. Thanks. You've been listening to the Traffic Handler Podcast. We're about getting new customers, making more sales, and growing your e-commerce retail business. I'm your host, Amy Biddle. Get more at amybiddle.me. And until next time, go sell more stuff.